So while I was learning about Betfair Trading and Betfair, I was working full time in a customer service office for a large print firm. Quite a large office, maybe 25 people in there, and sat at the PC all day. Now, obviously, with it, that again. So while I was learning about Betfair and specifically Betfair Trading, I was working full time in a customer service office in a large print firm. So I was sat at a PC all day. Now, obviously, being a place of work, you weren't allowed to use Betfair, weren't allowed to gamble, it was a sacking offence. What Betfair had at the time was Betfair Lite. Now, that wasn't blocked by the company's software. And all that gave us, it was just a basic black and white screen. It showed the markets, it showed the market prices. You had to update it manually, but it worked quite well. You don't need a lot of bells and whistles for tennis trading. That worked pretty well for quite a while. Let me get a lot more experience of the markets that if I was having to rely on just being able to trade on an evening, it would have taken a lot longer. So it certainly helped me, but was obviously risky. There were a few times where we were sat in the office, everybody was sat in rows of three, probably more similar to a call centre setup. I was on the right hand side of our group of three, quite nicely next to the window. There was a large windowsill, and that was often used as a seat if someone came down to speak to one of the other people in the office and they were sat by the window. You would always see people sitting on these on the windowsills, and if someone was sat there, they were maybe 8 feet away, no more, and could quite easily see what was on the screen if they had a look. Most of the time they weren't interested in what I was doing anyway. What I did do, I would have a scoreboard in the bottom corner of the screen so I could monitor the match. I could bring up the Betfair Lite page when I needed to make a trade, and that worked pretty well. It also helped to keep your emotions in check. You couldn't start jumping up, down, and throwing your arms in the air because that would draw attention to yourself, and you didn't want to do that because you're out the door. On a couple of occasions, my boss was actually stood behind me, looking directly at the screen. And thankfully, she had awful eyesight, really awful eyesight, and she couldn't see what was on the screen. At the time, I also had the Betfair Tennis page. You couldn't use the Betfair main site, but for some reason, the Betfair Tennis page, that unfortunately has now been taken down, that showed you the matches in the order they were coming up. It showed you the prices, showed you the liquidity, and you could also get head-to-head information. A very useful site. Unfortunately, they've taken it down, but we were able to. I was able to use that on a company PC. There were occasions when a director was sitting on the windowsill talking to the person behind me. If he looked at the screen, I was out pretty much straight away. So times like that were quite stressful. But generally, as long as you just kept your wits about you, you knew who was around, you were okay. You knew when there was a lot more traffic through the office, it wasn't a good idea to do it. I had the idea that I could spend a little bit more time trading at work, and I convinced my boss that we weren't able to do the work that we had. We were really struggling, the three of us. But because I was the more productive, this is the way I solved it, because I was the more productive of the three, if she gave me 2 extra hours a day, an hour at the start of the day, an hour at the end, I could take care of the extra work. She agreed to that. What that meant was I had an hour on a morning where there was no one else in the office, and what I used that hour for was to research the matches, write my daily blog. I'd started that by this time. Then I could crack on with the real work of the day. But because I had an hour at the end to catch up on anything, it gave me quite a bit of trading time throughout the day. But I was making a decent second wage working it that way. I did get the idea that if I put the BetTrader software on a USB stick, that I could run the software off the USB stick and it wouldn't be blocked by the company software. So I gave that a try, put it on a stick, brought it in, put it in the back of the PC tower, and I was able to run the software on my work PC, and that was great. I could trade anything. I could trade the horses, football, anything. And I did that for maybe 2-3 weeks, perhaps a little bit longer. Thought I had the perfect way of beating the system. Now the person that sat directly opposite me, there were 2 rows of 3 on the other side of like an 18-inch divider. They were the IT staff, IT guys. And the bloke who sat directly opposite me was the IT manager. So you build up a bit of a relationship, just general chatting, what's happened at the weekend, etc., etc. And it was quite interesting. You could hear little bits of conversations about what was happening IT wise in the rest of the building, but generally didn't take too much notice. One day I was happily trading. I'm pretty sure it was the horses. And I just became aware of somebody stood talking to the IT manager who was sitting down, obviously opposite myself. And the IT manager asked the question, well, how's he got it on there? And the answer came back, he's using a USB stick. Shit. I started sweating like crazy. I thought, that's it, I'm rumbled. I wanted to listen to the conversation. I know I've got to get this USB stick out and dispose of it, just get rid of it. The towers were underneath the desk and set back quite a bit. The only way I could reach that USB stick was to disappear under the desk. How do you do that without drawing attention to yourself? And I literally there goes the pen, under the desk, pulled out the USB stick. I actually put it down my boxers. Why I thought that would be more safe, I don't know. It was my heart was racing, my brain was racing. Back into my chair, and I'm trying to listen to the conversation, and there wasn't too much else going on, and the other guy had moved away. So I was just waiting to be shot, basically. I was never asked about it, never questioned, it was never mentioned. Now I can only guess at how I got away with it. From listening to conversations in the weeks and months before this, it was obviously IT staff were drastically overworked. And if they got any extra work, they were so stressed out, it was going to put them under. They just couldn't cope with anything else. So maybe they didn't want the hassle of an investigation. Maybe because I'd built up some sort of relationship with this guy, he didn't want to see me get sacked, and thought that if he had this conversation, maybe the conversation with him and his minion was staged so that he knew I would hear it and act upon it, and so long as I didn't do it again, they'd say no more. I can only guess because no one spoke to me. I was never sacked. I never used the USB stick again. I didn't even use Betfair Lite. I did not use the PC after that. It was just too stressful, too scary. I did continue to trade at work, but used the Betfair app on my phone and got around it that way. I don't recommend it. The stress was ridiculous. In the long run, it helped me progress quicker. So in that respect, it was worth it, but it was a massive risk. Don't do it. It is not worth it. And I think that's when the grey hairs started coming out. I will see you on the next video.